St. Therese, the first canonized couple. And we were praying, kneeling in front of them, asking for the grace to be a holy married couple like they were. And Laura stood up, and I got up to one knee and said, "Would you marry me?" And she said, "Are you joking?" And I said, "I've got a ring and I'm kneeling in this setting. If I'm joking, that's pretty bad." And she said, "Yes, thankfully," and we prayed. But it was, there was something very, very beautiful about that for us, like trying to choose a way that seemed worthy to ask the intercession of saints, a kind of very Catholic way. If you have a beautiful Catholic proposal in mind, the strangeness about proposing in front of relics is if you say it to your non-Catholic friends, "I proposed to my wife in front of some dead people." Doesn't sound so romantic, but for us it was a really, really beautiful a moment. And in fact, a year later is when Louis and Zélie were canonized in Rome. So we were able to go as a couple, an engaged couple, to go to Rome to learn from them. And so actually, as our married life has gone on, I guess one of the kind of insights that I've had is that throughout your marriage, you need good heavenly patrons. You need good earthly support. So in the same way in your confirmation, you have an earthly sponsor and a heavenly sponsor. You choose a saint name. That's been a real grace for us. So I'd say something in marriage of who are your other couples that are a few stages ahead of you in your walk of life. So if you're discerning marriage, who are those married couples that I can speak to? And also, who are those heavenly patrons I can ask for their intercession in whatever vocation I'm discerning? So of course, engagement leads to marriage.
I guess one of the things about any Catholic vocation is it calls us to be a little bit countercultural. So as Brenden and I got engaged, we realised that we had to make some decisions that were countercultural and were difficult to explain to non-Catholic friends or even Catholic friends as well, really. So things like we decided that it wasn't appropriate to live together before we were married, which in London obviously would have saved us a lot of money before we were married and would have been very convenient. When we were first engaged, Brenden lived in Barking and I lived in Wimbledon. So if anybody is familiar with the District Line tube map, that is one end to the other end of the District Line, which Brenden, bless him, got very familiar with. He did the late night trip on the District Line from one end to the other. I think he still remembers how many minutes it was from one end. 77 minutes, there you go, from Wimbledon to Barking. And compared to many of our secular friends, we got married quite young as well. We didn't have much money. Brenden was just finishing his master's. So a lot of people would question, shouldn't we wait a little bit so we can save more money and have the kind of big white wedding, maybe buy a house or be where we want to be in our careers. But we thought it was important to get married when we wanted to get married. So our wedding party was pretty low budget, but still the best party, in my humble opinion, I've ever been to. So things like that were quite countercultural, but a lot of people asked us in the days following our wedding day if we had, I don't know if anyone has ever heard of wedding blues. In the days following your wedding, you've kind of been building up to the wedding, and everything is about kind of choosing flowers and bridesmaid dresses and all of those things. And then afterwards, people get quite depressed after the wedding day has finished. But for Brenden and I, it was kind of the start of the rest of our lives, really. It was really exciting to be looking for a flat and to be living together and to kind of put those things in place. So I think it was good training, really, for marriage. I guess compared to some of the other vocations that you'll hear about this week, it's not as countercultural. Lots of people get married, but to be a Catholic married couple, we needed to make decisions within that were hard to explain to people outside.
Have you ever heard the expression, "Here but for the grace of God go I"? It's quite a good expression, a humbling expression, because we didn't assume just because, say, we made these quite difficult countercultural decisions that cost us. To do that doesn't mean that, okay, we're somehow holier, saints are the sinners who keep asking for the mercy of God, as is said. We didn't assume that would necessarily we relied on the grace of God, but also that we needed to continue to, to strive. That it wasn't just if you do these things as a kind of magic recipe and formula here, but for the grace of God, go I. There will be terrible things, challenges, joys, struggles that happen throughout married life. So quite early on, one of the great pieces of advice, I guess, somebody gave us was to tell us to do a marriage course. And at the time when I heard that, I said, oh, surely like a marriage course, that's the kind of thing you go on when your marriage is on the rocks. And they said, no, it said, love isn't just an emotion. You've either got it or you're not. Love is also a kind of skill. If Aquinas is right and to love is to will the good of the other, there's a kind of act of the will. So we said, okay, we enrolled for a marriage course. And early on in that course, one of the kind of key bits of wisdom that we received as a couple or that confirmed us in that decision to invest in our marriage in that way, was they said, if you want to prepare for children, invest in your marriage. So doing something like a marriage course. Because the marriage is the context of love with which the children grow up in. So we often think of couples who when a child comes along, the child is the entire focus. And of course, children are important. In a sense, the purpose of marriage and family life is not only for the good of the couple, but for the raising of children. But that sense of we're doing it for, the context of love, to strengthen our love, and the result is the context of love for our children, our future children to grow up. And it was really, really important. And it raised for us things, it happens if you're in a relationship, if you're already married, and even in friendships, you'll know this, that things come and go, and sometimes there's an issue that's raised. You sometimes let it go, but it kind of builds blockages, and you don't really realize until you have the space to kind of speak and openly and honestly communicate. It was a real schooling in learning to communicate in this new state of life as a married couple. And so it was a really, really beautiful thing that love isn't just an emotion, it's also a skill that can be worked on. That may sound like a quite strange insight that love is a skill, but for us certainly it's something that is not, you don't just have to leave to chance. You ask for the grace of God, but there's also things that can be worked on. And we certainly needed all of the investment we could get, because I'm just going to give to Laura now, as long as things are permitting, to talk a little bit about some of the kind of challenges I guess we've faced as a couple.
So we, quite early on in our marriage, we fell pregnant within 2 months of being married, which was quite a surprise. And as surprised as we were obviously very, very exciting, but kind of 10 weeks into that pregnancy, we sadly lost that baby. And I know that since having that first miscarriage, it's a story that I've heard lots and lots of times. So I know it's incredibly common for couples to experience that loss. But it was a real shock to us, because we were kind of newly married, and we just thought, people get pregnant and they have babies, and that's how it works. And sadly, shortly after that, we had a second miscarriage. But I think those experiences taught us so much in that first year of marriage. I think there was a level of incredible intimacy that came with that within the first year of marriage. There was the lesson I think I took away from it as well is that even in the midst of sorrow and kind of wallowing in that at times, there are moments of joy, and that's okay. I remember reading about that in the Pope's encyclical, the Amoris Laetitia, about kind of the joy that is present in families even when we're going through sad times and going through sorrow, as well as kind of training us really in we've obviously been blessed to have 2 children since then, but I think really training us in the virtues that we had to experience in that time.
And so I guess the real insight, and something we were reflecting on as we were thinking about this talk, was this idea of how do we make moments? How do we find joy in the midst of the mess, in the midst of suffering? And at the moment, we are really challenged by that because we have a 2-month-old, a 2-year-old. We've just moved house. In fact, our new build is not quite finished yet, so we're living with Granny and Grandad, and we get the keys to our new house on October 15th. So things are slightly chaotic at the moment. How do you find joy? One of the best bits of married advice about the marriage day in particular that I received and I pass on to others was, it will go by in a flash. So make sure you take some mental snapshots of the moment to just go back as a couple and just to kind of take it in. And how true that's been, that need, that discipline throughout life in general, not only married life, but any particular vocation. When I was younger, my father, we had this old VW transporter. It's a bit like a camper van, and we loved it. It was terrible. It used to break down all the time. And it's one of those situations where, my dad could have, and I think he did this instinctively, it became a joy when it broke down, because he made it just so much fun. It was almost an inevitability of, well, here we go, there's a mattress in the back, and, AA will arrive eventually. And I thought to myself, would I deal with that in the same way, with the kind of same grace? He managed to make it into a moment, to capture something, to deal with it with a kind of grace. And so we're praying for that in the midst of being sleep deprived, there are particular stages of marriage. We're in the early years. So if you're married and you're kind of beyond the early years, you're kind of looking, thinking, oh, I don't miss it. Or maybe you do miss it. But how can we, regardless of our state in life, and we needed this in engagement, right? So that engagement doesn't pass by, that you can savor the grace of being engaged. There's grace in the waiting. We also needed that on our wedding day, those particular snapshots. And also, so that's the kind of lesson we're trying to do. How do you make a moment? How do you find joy in the particular day-to-day life, in the mess, in the suffering, to find those moments of joy and to savor the moments of real, genuine joy? One of the great joys of being a father of a newly born baby is she's just in that moment now where when you smile, the smile is reflected back, and there's just beauty to kind of savor that, to take a snapshot and to remind us. So, unless you want to add anything, my love, that's a little bit of something of our story. Do you know that element of learning to be friends first, of trying to see love as a skill to continue to build? That trying to make moments in the different phases of life, whatever challenges they bring. That's something of the story of our married love. But we're very, very open to any particular questions, and I guess that's where the real interesting kind of content may come from. But thank you very much for being here tonight, and please do pray for us as a married couple, not least because we have to take a 2-month-old back to Banbury in the Midlands after this.
Well, thank you very much to the three of you. And it's now really open to the floor. I have a microphone here and I'm going to come around. So if anyone has a question, if you can indicate that. But I thought I'd ask you a question first, if that's all right. You gave a really eloquent description of some of the perhaps the challenges you had, being sort of perhaps countercultural to some of your friends and your peer group. How have you found, have you found you've been able to find a context within sort of the wider society? Because being, as you explained yourself, being married in your mid-20s and being a young family and with some of the journey to that, have you found that you've been able to find common ground with people who've had a different sort of path?
Yeah, common ground. Is this on? Can people hear me? Yeah? Common ground is the basis of any dialogue. If there's no common ground, there's no conversation. And I've often found the thing I in my prayer to strengthen myself as a husband, I think about my marriage vows. So I remember, and to make it easy for myself, the 4 Fs, free, fruitful, faithful, and fully. I agree. I committed, I vowed to love Laura freely, fruitfully, faithfully, and fully. And so those are the kind of 4 elements of the vows. And I think that everyone, regardless of if you're religious or not religious, can see the beauty of that, to love people freely. You're not being coerced into marriage. That fruitfulness that married love isn't just for the couple, that it ought to, a couple ought not to become more insular, that love is, in a sense, inviting and shared with others, and particularly is beautiful through children. Free, fruitful, faithful, that people would love the idea that marriage, you are committed to one person. It's a very attractive idea to many, difficult to live out, but very, very attractive. And then fully, as in permanent, I think there are very few people who would go into marriage thinking, I hope it only lasts a year. I think many people would want it to last forever. So I always think there's common ground on those elements. And what I say to people is that, the bar is high, and it's not as if we don't fail, but there is a lot of, thankfully, there's a lot of mercy in the church. So, being able to go to confession. And it's almost in a say, like we're saying to people, it's not, these 4 F's are not about trying to restrict you and to limit you, but it's saying, like, this is a formula for beautiful, strong married love, and a love that is really powerful. Now, people have particular situations, so you meet people in their situations when people share the reasons that they may have been separated, or the kind of difficulties that they've gone through. Some we would have some kind of direct connection with or sympathy with, but many others we wouldn't. Again, we're just reminded, I guess, here, but for the grace of God go I, that you try and share something of the reason that we believe that God challenges us through the decisions that we made to strengthen us and to train us in the kind of strength we'll need for married love. But in a sense, it's more like a kind of confusion, like, oh gosh, do people still do that? So many of the times it's like, you just kind of talk to people and respond to their questions when they have them.
I think, sorry, just to add as well that I think the difficult point for us now is that maybe some of our peers haven't had children, and I think that's the time when it's it was fine when we were just married or we didn't have children, but we're living very different lives now to our peers that have children. So for us, we found it really important to also have a community that does kind of support the choices that we have made. So being really intentional. We've just moved to a new area, and we've been really intentional about seeking out other young families, seeking out families within our church, people that our children can be friends with. And so I think sometimes we have to be intentional about seeking out that community, and as well.
Thank you very much. Now, who else has a question? Coming down.
You're going to let us off very lightly.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really found your talk very inspiring, and thanks also for mentioning the really hard parts and also the miscarriages. And I'm really sorry to hear about those experiences, but thank you for sharing them so bravely. I had a question about sort of how you've managed to cope with experiences when times have been tough, thinking particularly about things like work, or times when you actually don't necessarily live the same experiences, and there are pressures that one of you might have in a workplace but not the other. How have you managed when you've kind of been suffering alone to support each other and not to kind of go off into a silo and sort of just experience that by yourselves? Do you have any thoughts on that? Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I think we live in a world that's very, I don't know, like Instagram. This is what family life is like, and I think I'm particularly prone to get drawn into that. This is what I should be doing as a mother and things. And there have been times when I particularly have found work a bit stressful and work a bit tough. But we heard some advice from a Catholic friend, and I think that he's American, so I think they're a lot more, they're willing to accept this in America. But he said, your mind is a dangerous place and you shouldn't go in there alone. So I think we've been quite quick to know that we are not the answer to all of each other's problems. That might be that we need spiritual direction, we might need to go to confession, and we might need to see a counsellor, we might need to get help in that way. And I think we've learned to accept that. Particularly after I'd had a second miscarriage, Brenden said, I think you just need to go and speak to a professional about this. It wasn't, Brenden isn't the person who can fix everything, and that shouldn't be the case. And we should, primarily put God first, above everything else. But there are times when, that's not appropriate. And there have been other times in our marriage where I think it's important to recognise. I think maybe other people recognise this in relationships, but when you love somebody, you want to fix their problems and you want to help them. And that's the beauty of a Catholic marriage, I think, that there are 3 people in our marriage, and we know that I cannot be everything for Brenden and he cannot be everything for me. And I think at those key times, particularly for me, I think you've been quite quick to say, okay, I think this is what we need, and you need some spiritual direction, or you need, you need to see a counsellor. And there's no shame in that either. I think, as well as Catholics, sometimes we may fall into a tendency of thinking that prayer will fix everything, and obviously prayer is incredibly important, but there are times when we need help, and I think that's okay to ask for that help from outside. Do you want to add?
Yeah, every single problem that Laura and I have had in our marriage has been a fruit of miscommunication. I remember when we were newly married, and the real miscommunication was I'm quite sporadic. I like things happening at the last minute. Work-wise, I go under the philosophy diamonds are made under pressure. It's an annoying person at university doing things the night before. And Laura's a kind of more of a teacher. It's like, unless I know about it 3 weeks and I want to be able to prepare for it. So there was a clash there. And it was a failure of communication. And it's really funny. There's never been a moment where there's those kind of misunderstandings. The more friction there is, and that tendency, as you were saying, to go into silos, it's always been solved by good communication. So one of the things that I guess that was really practical assistance for us was the marriage course. They had this, how do you learn to listen? Leading with listening. We have Pope Francis who talks about this a lot, discernment and accompaniment. We're having a worldwide synodal process. It's trying to teach to build communion within the church requires leading with listening, as is the case in the domestic church. So very much at different moments in our marriage, it's been that sense. And I think one of the things I'm taking from the synodal process that's taking on, going on throughout the church universal, in the coming weeks, is again building some of those skills of having good quality spiritual conversations, but also being able to do good discernment. What are the temptations? What are the graces in our marriage and stuff? So we've been very helped. It's beautiful to be able to give this talk at the Jesuit church of Farm Street, because Ignatius is is a great friend in learning to discern and to try and build communion in marriage. And the last thing to say is there's a great skill that you do on the spiritual exercises called the presupposition, which is a great skill not only for marriage but also for tricky conversations. It's called the presupposition, and Ignatius says, let it be presupposed that every good Christian should put a positive intention on what the other person is saying rather than a negative one. So assume charitable motives. Easily said, hard to apply. But in every case where I'm able to do that in that marriage, where I receive that grace to be able to do that, and also to do the hard work, like Laura was said, like sometimes it's being able to have the humility to receive help, whether it's help in learning to communicate. They're not skills you're raised in, this kind of emotional and spiritual intelligence. So any kind of upskilling, marriage has forced us to see where our flaws are. in ourselves and one another, and to help each other in that, to kind of build communion in the domestic church.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that very inspiring answer. Anybody else have anything they would like to... Oh, here we are, Father Dominic.
Thanks, Janice. Just like to say, first of all, Laura and Brenda, thanks so much for a beautiful testimony on the gift of marriage, on the calling to marriage. There are lots of questions, I suppose, which people could have, and if we had the facility for people who are following on the live stream asking questions, there may be all sorts of things which people might ask. They might ask about the difficulty of marriages breaking down, and of how we're able to show mercy there and how we're able to help. But you've touched on that, I think, quite significantly as well in what you've been saying as a young couple. One question I've got is kind of, I was thinking, what about parish life? Is there something about parishes supporting couples? And then I thought that probably does happen quite well, actually, I think, in many places. But one of the issues we've got, I suppose, with after the pandemic as well, and this is kind of partly, I suppose, it's a bit naughty, but it's kind of Catholic Voices stuff as well, is people are falling away from the church, that people are not coming back, and as we know, the big age group there is people, are children and young adults. So you're at the beginning of growing a family, you're very committed Catholics, you are building the domestic church, you're wanting to bring your children up in the Catholic faith as very strong, committed Catholics. Have you got anything to say to those who can't quite work out what we do about young people not staying with the church? Is there anything within family life that just in your few years that you might want to say to encourage young couples and couples in general?
Thank you very much, Father Dominic. One of the most beautiful and untapped potentials or opportunities for parishes from Pope Francis's encyclical Amoris Laetitia, the joy of love, is this idea of linking up couples or mentoring couples. So not only in marriage preparation, you have married, like couples that are preparing for marriage, and you link them up with couples who are already married within the parish. And I thought it was very, very beautiful. So we've been asked by some priest friends to kind of journey with other couples, and we also journey with other couples who are a few stages ahead of us. So that sense of discipling one another. So it's not just a kind of, disciple-disciple relationship. It's kind of mutually enriching as you learn to share life together in joys and struggles. So in terms of what a parish could do, I think how you can connect up married couples, like getting those married couples who think, I want to give something to the church. And maybe there are some couples who are away from the church and you think, okay, actually we can just meet, and what would tapping into that particular aspect look like? And the other element, I think the second part of that question is like,
Yes, how to keep children in the faith, I think that's... Yeah. I think one of the things that we have talked about quite a lot is, we have a 2-year-old and an 8-week-old, so they're not too rebellious about going to church at the moment, or maybe they're more so. And so, we can't give any advice about kind of the age group that we're talking about, but that making sure that the faith in our family home is a really lived faith. It's not something we do for 1 hour on a Sunday and then that's it. It's something that we talk about through the week, that we that's all encompassing. It's something that's woven through the fabric of our family. And so when our eventual teenagers are questioning whether or not to come to church, it's not as simple as will I go to church for 1 hour on a Sunday? It's the whole fabric of their life. It's knitted throughout their day, throughout their week, throughout, kind of celebrating feasts and different things throughout the church. And the other thing we have been quite intentional about, especially having moved quite recently, is finding other families. I think we're quite keen to make sure that our children know that other families live like we do. It's not just, we're not just strange families who might sit down and pray the rosary together or pray before we eat or have weird religious pictures on our wall and things like that, that there are other families that do that, and therefore, it's not something that they have to, it's a lot to ask a child or a teenager to be countercultural. That's really difficult. But if they know that if they go to their friend's house for dinner, they will also pray grace before they eat, and they also won't watch certain things on TV and, things like that. So I think being intentional about community and making sure it's something that's woven into the fabric of our lives, I think gives a slightly better chance of children. It's a harder decision to make to leave the church, I think.
If it takes a village to raise a child, one of the things we're intentionally praying about is who's our village? What does that look like? Who are the people we can connect with? And it strikes me that a parish is a perfect place for that to happen in an intentional way to kind of connect people up. And through my work with Catholic Voices, we've done some surveys of people, of Catholics, how have they been faring during the pandemic, their different attitudes. And for those who have said in these various surveys that they've stopped coming to Mass and stopped live streaming for whatever reason, we asked them why. There's lots of reasons. Was it that the church wasn't welcoming enough? There was obstacles there, or was it that I was never reached out to? And the majority of people said the reason that they stopped coming is they got out the habit. It sounds obvious, but how do you get people back into the habit? Why would anybody, if we're missing our young families and we genuinely miss them, how will they come back? And, in a sense, it's not rocket science. People come because of a personal invite. So as I pray in, those people, those loved ones in my life who are thinking, what can I invite them to? And then we start thinking as a parish and ask those questions. What is it that are those thresholds that will help them get back into the practice? So, for example, we're in this new parish and we're going to a toddlers group on a Tuesday called Little Lambs, very, very cute. And you're thinking maybe those are the thresholds onto the church, it's to the church hall, and, how do different things connect? What does coming back to Mass look like? So thinking really creatively and strategically. And I think the Synod is a really good excuse, in a sense, to listen to people and their experiences. Throughout the pandemic, it's a chance to have lots of really spiritual conversations, precisely for those who are we missing, and how do we equip people to do those personal invites, and what is it that they're being invited to?
Thank you. That sounds. I just wanted to add my own reflection there. It sounds like it's important that people are seen and welcome. And to see them, I guess, we have to be open as a church. Are there any other questions or points people would like to raise? It'll be, I presume there's a forum, Father Dominic, for people watching on the live stream to contact and put questions. Yeah, because I'm wondering, because I've, one of the more positive sort of changes of the pandemic is we have been, I guess, reaching people that we don't know we're reaching with the live stream. So this could be provoking all sorts of inspirations for people. I'll come back up if there are no more questions. Well, as Father Dominic says, it's really for him and the parish organisers to thank you all for coming. But I would just like to wrap up today, just as a facilitator, to say thank you to Brenden and Laura and to Claire. And I think you've given us a lot of food for thought. Try and find some space to inspire those teenagers in the wider communities that you move in, because maybe they'll catch some of your inspiration and enthusiasm. And that's, I'm sure as a teacher, you maybe have opportunities for that. But thank you for presenting an attractive model of the way of life that you've chosen, and for also sharing how you've woven the Catholic faith into your day-to-day life. So it just leaves me to say to the wider audience listening, you can come every night, and tomorrow night is the religious life. You don't have to be interested in joining the religious life, but it will be interesting to see what is shared. And on Thursday, I think we're our lay missionary, and on Friday, lay community. So we have a good week to look forward to. Thank you very much.